Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome to Leap of Faith, the program where we speak with people about their spiritual journeys so we can gain insight and inspiration on our own spiritual journey. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Each episode of Leap of Faith, I speak with someone about their spiritual journey to Torah. I've done a few episodes on other related topics, but by far the vast majority of our conversations have been people sharing their own journey. Some of these journeys are Teshuvah stories, some are conversion stories, and others are Noahites, non-Jews who have embraced the Torah lifestyle set out for them in the 7 mitzvot B'nai Noach. One episode, which received a lot of positive feedback from my listeners, was when I interviewed my oldest son, Daniel, who shared what it was like to accompany his parents on their journey and then to face his own moment of truth when, as a young man of 20 years old, he realized that he had a choice to make, and he embarked on his own Teshuvah journey separate from his parents. Being the child of Balei Teshuvah or converts to Orthodox Judaism carries with it a unique perspective on what it means to be an observant Jew. It brings with it the understanding that being Torah observant is a choice, whether it's something new or the only way of life you've ever known. Watching your parents struggle with things other people in your community don't struggle with, dealing with questions about Jewishness of your last name maybe, or watching unobservant extended family members and their very different lifestyles gives you an ability to see Torah observance in a much broader context. And it also comes with a gift, the gift of being a bridge. For the child of the next generation, Torah observance and Orthodox Jewish culture is mother tongue, but it comes with a fluency of the greater world as well. The next generation can serve as a bridge for those who are coming to observance in a way that perhaps no one else can. On today's Leap of Faith, I will be speaking with Shani Kramer, who will be sharing with us the Teshuvah story of her parents, who came from secular and Reformed Jewish backgrounds and then grew together towards Torah observance. Shani then shares a little bit with us about her own journey and how she sees herself as a bridge in her small community. When we come back from the break, we'll hear Shani's fascinating and inspirational story. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Joining me is my special guest, Shani Kramer. Shani is a program director for her local Jewish Federation in South Bend, Indiana, where she lives with her husband and children. I didn't even know there were Jews in South Bend, but I'm sure we'll hear more about that. Today's show is going to be a little different than our usual one because Shani is not actually going to be telling us about her own spiritual journey. Well, not exactly, because we're all on a spiritual journey. So, of course, it is her spiritual journey, but she's going to be sharing about her parents' journey and what it was like growing up in a home where she was the first generation raised in Torah observance. So if you enjoyed the episode I did with my son, you're sure to enjoy this one. So excited to have you here, Shani. Welcome to Leap of Faith.
Thank you so much, Penina. I just wanted to say a couple of years back, I was going on a trip, and I was actually going to Chicago, which is about 2 hours away, and it was a perfect time to look for a speech to listen to, and I YouTubed, I Googled, and came up with your name and your story. It was so fascinating. I really felt a connection, and never thought a couple of years later I'd actually be talking to you and doing an interview, which is a wonderful thing. And I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm really excited to have you. So I usually like to start the conversations off at the beginning, asking people, what kind of a home they were raised in. And, like 80% of the time, they talk about how either they weren't Jewish or it was a non-religious home. But you were raised in a Torah observant home, right?
That's correct. I was born into a home that was, my parents were already observing the Torah lifestyle. I'm actually the youngest of 6. So by the time I was born, they were already quite entrenched, I would say, in this way of life. But I was very clear growing up through their stories, and obviously through the family that I had only all my family. My parents are both Balei Tshuva. They both chose the path of Torah later in their lives. So their families are both not observant. And so obviously just growing up with cousins and uncles and aunts that were not religious, right away realized it was a little bit different than some of my friends. So I did have that growing up. And then, of course, hearing my parents' stories really shaped a lot of my life and the choices that I made growing up. Is I really did have my own journey to Judaism. So, we have that as well. I might not be a Baal Tshuva in the sense of the word, but I think everybody has that moment in their life where they have a choice to choose to stay either on the path of Torah or to choose the path of Torah. So I think we'll see that later on, and I think that's going to be very interesting for everybody to hear.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking forward to hearing that as well. In fact, it's so funny because I like to say that we're all Balei Tshuva. We're all Baal Tshuvas every day. We choose when we open our eyes. We choose whether or not we're going to be Torah observant. When we decide to make a blessing before we eat something, that's a conscious choice in that moment. So in a way, we're all Baal Tshuva. And, I once had somebody say to me, well, only a Baal Tshuva would say that. but we really do. If we believe that we have free will, then we really do make that choice in every moment, right?
That's true. That's true. And I've always felt, I think actually when I've been older, I really felt almost a little envious of people who've had that choice, that real choice of choosing that path and coming from a different path. I think when a person grows up in a home, for me, obviously all my experiences that I'm speaking about are my experiences. And like I said, I have 5 other siblings, and their experiences, even growing up in the same home, could be so different from mine. But mine was, wow, this is such an amazing thing. I can't imagine somebody choosing this, having the choices of the whole world wide open to you, and then choosing the path of Torah. It must be such a different feeling from just being born into it. This is what I grew up with my mother's milk, this is what was just the norm for me. I do think that growing up in a family where my parents were both chose this path, it did give me a little bit more of a, let's say, opening and understanding of the world, being that I was exposed to people who were not religious at a very young age, where I think that a lot of other people might not have had that exposure. So I think there was more of that aspect of growing up of understanding and maybe later coming to appreciate what I had growing up. I don't know how much as a teenager I really appreciated it. I think a lot of times it was a little strange for me, but I'm sure we'll discuss that later on in the interview.
Yeah. Well, I think that is really one of the reasons that a show like this is so important is, there are a lot of people who are on a journey towards Torah, and that was the primary reason that I created this show. But there are also a lot of people who, as you say, they can't even imagine. They were raised in a Torah observant home, and they just can't imagine what it would even feel like, what the process of going through that would be like. And so
exactly,
by sharing people's stories, people who are Torah observant, who always have been, also can get a glimpse into what it's like to choose.
100%.
When I told my children, you're going to be raising the first generation, because my children went through the journey with us, whereas in your case, your parents had already, you say, were firmly entrenched in it. For my children, they were experiencing a tremendous amount of changes. But as they got older, I shared with them that, their biggest challenge was going to be making Judaism interesting and exciting for children who were raised in it. And it's a very different experience, right?
Yes, it is. It definitely is. And that's, I think, now at my age, I can really appreciate the fact that I had almost like the best of both worlds. Now I could say that,
right.
Where I had the exposure, and that my parents really had to do the hard work. We'll see in the story that both my parents, both of them, had their own stories, their own journeys, and they did have to do the hard work. They actually made that really difficult choice to change everything that they knew against whatever obstacles they had, and to choose the life of Torah. It's an amazing thing. I have so much respect for them, especially as an adult now. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we launch into it then? Why don't you pick one of your parents and tell us a little bit about how they grew up?
Okay, so I'll start with my father, and then I'll sort of segue into my mother and how they met. I think the story sort of works itself out pretty seamlessly. Of course, I'm sure for them, it did not feel seamless at the time at all.
Of course not.
So my father is born and bred a New Yorker, American, a couple generations already in America. I think we were originally from Russia, but through the war, they were here in America. So he grew up in a staunchly Reform family, a very Reform background. They did not observe much in the sense of actually observing anything. They did, go to temple, maybe it was once a year. And I know that my father was always a person of seeker of truth, questioning. So way back when he was a teenager, he was already questioning, why do we do this? Why do we do that? And then he used to say that he would ask his rabbi, Rabbi, if it says in the Bible that we need to keep kosher, how come we don't keep kosher? And his rabbi at the time said to him, you know what, Jay, when you're a rabbi, you'll know the answer.
Oh my goodness.
So actually, I think my father took that as a challenge and decided that he was, at some point, he was going through his college years. He was pursuing a degree in English, and he decided that at the same time he's going to go to rabbinical school to become a Reform rabbi. I guess, if you ask a seeker of truth, they're asking something and somebody tells them an answer, they're going to go for it. So he, he thought maybe the answer will be there. I'll learn about this when I'm going to school. So he started off actually in the University of Cincinnati pursuing his degree, and he had already gone through some of the pre-rabbinical studies that he had to go through. And he had a year off where he won a scholarship to the Hebrew University in Israel. And so he decided he was going to take the year off and I guess he wasn't quite feeling his questions were being answered in the way that he wanted. So he decided he's going to go to Israel for the year, and he's going to really figure out what it is that he wants to do with his life. Now, this was in 1965. So at that time, the way you got to Israel was mostly by boat.
Oh, wow.
So he, yes. No, I mean, I'm sure there were planes, but they were quite expensive. And they were not like how they are now, where we can get on a plane and fly for what it is, 10, 13 hours and be in Israel. Right. So he describes, going off on the boat. And he mentioned, he remembers they set sail probably the minute that Shabbos started. They were setting sail. And at the point, he didn't know that was something that could be an issue. See, off he went on his boat. It was a couple weeks journey to Israel.
Can't even imagine having to be on a boat for 2 weeks. Wow.
I know. Yes. It's pretty amazing. And he said he was pretty seasick. That was the truth. So apparently it wasn't an easy journey. I can't imagine at that time being on a boat was easy for anybody. So
we're not talking about a yacht. We're talking about a boat. Like a boat. Cargo boat with space for people.
Right. I think he said the shipping line is still in existence today. I think it's called Zim.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's the name of the ship that he told me. So yeah, apparently they still exist. So either way, he comes off the boat, right? It's his first time in Israel. Now I have to tell you, my father has a love of Israel that is so strong and so deep. it's genetically been passed on to me and my siblings. So it must have been an amazing first impression that Israel made back in the 1960s. And he gets off the boat. He's acclimating himself to his new surroundings and attending classes at Hebrew University. Now, he also was attending, classes and services at Hebrew Union College, and that's the college in Israel for the rabbinical
Reform studies.
Reform studies.
Yeah.
So he was doing that at the same time.
Okay, Shani, wow, that is a fantastic place to stop you. I'm sorry I have to stop you, but we're at the end of this segment. We have to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll continue our fascinating conversation with my very special guest, Shani Kramer. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the second segment of Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I'm speaking with Shani Kramer, Program Director for the Jewish Federation in South Bend, Indiana. Now, Shani has been sharing with us what it was like growing up in a home with two Balei Tshuva parents. And before the break, she was telling us about how her father, who was studying to be a Reform rabbi, had taken a year to come to Israel and was studying at both the Hebrew University and also as a Hebrew Union College?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So why don't you take it from there, Shani?
Okay, I will. So this is, I find, the climax of the story, the turning point, I would say. And it finds us with my father, Jay, who was decided with a friend to, as he was always looking for something. He had heard of a small section in Jerusalem, which you may all know, called Mea Sha'arim, and he heard of it. Obviously, at the time, he had heard maybe not all positive things, but he was very curious as to what he might find in that section of Jerusalem.
If I can break in, because not all of our listeners are familiar with Jerusalem, but Mea Shearim is an area of Jerusalem which is what people would call ultra-Orthodox. And so if you go to Mea Shearim, everybody there is wearing modest clothing. All of the men are wearing black hats. All of the women are covered. And we've even heard stories sometimes of people who go in not modestly dressed, maybe getting a little harassed because they're so zealous for keeping God's law. And so this is an area that has a reputation for being extreme and ultra-Orthodox. And so now your father was going to go to this area. Wow.
Exactly. I think there was a curiosity there.
Sure.
What is he going to find? What's he going to find? So he grabbed a friend with him, his friend David, and said, let's on our way to, this was on a Shabbos, they were going to go to services over at Union College.
Okay.
And they said, let's go through Mea Shearim. Let's check it out, and then we'll head over to Hebrew Union afterwards for the, Sabbath services. So my father describes himself, it's the 60s. So he's walking down the streets of Mea Shearim, right? Sticking out like a sore thumb. Everybody's wearing with the black and white, like you discussed. My father's wearing tight checkered pants. And he's got on a blue Palm Beach bomber jacket, and he's wearing his big class ring. And of course, he's got the wavy pompadour in the front. Yeah, the long hair, the nice Elvis sideburns. So he definitely, he made a picture, that's for sure. Walking
At least
down
he didn't drive through.
Friend. Right, that's true. No cars. It was hard to get a car back then. Otherwise, that would be a different story. Yeah. So they're walking down together, and they hear at one point a very beautiful and strong sound of singing.
Okay.
And they turn to each other, and that's interesting to them. And they say, "Okay, let's go in this building over here off to our side." And they walk in, And it turns out to be a Toldos Aaron shul, right, place of worship. And these are Hasidim, right, that wear those beautiful gold robes. And it's quite a picture for my father, who had never, ever seen something like that in his whole life.
Right.
And
they wear the gold robe in honor of Shabbat.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So you can imagine that there were probably hundreds of them there praying. And what a picture, what an impression that must be for somebody who's never in their life seen a chassid before.
Right.
And
like
the way that
world.
they pray and the way they daven, it's a totally different world. And it was so, my father just stood there in his tracks, totally entranced.
Wow.
And the thing is that Toldos Aaron also happens to daven, happens to pray slowly. And so hours are going by and the time is ticking. And my father's friend David turns to him and says at one point, Jay, I've had enough. Let's get going. Let's go on to our next destination. And my father turned back to him and said, Dave, you go. I'm staying. And so his friend picked himself up, walked out the door. My father stayed. Now it's getting quite late now. They go past lunchtime.
Right.
And my father's still there, still entranced, still looking around. And a tall chassid separates himself from the rest of them and comes over to my father and says, remember, we're talking Israel in the 1960s. You can't imagine anybody would speak in Nea Sha'arim anything that wasn't Hebrew or
Yiddish. Right.
Yes,
I would have expected Yiddish. Yeah.
Yes. And he turns to my father and says in perfectly British English, accented English, he said to him, do you have a place to eat for the Shabbos meal? And my father said, no, not really. Wasn't planning on having one, honestly. So he says to him, well, you're going to come with me. He says, let's stay for the Tish, right? The Rebbe was coming to have his meal with his Hasidim. So let's stay for that. I want you to see what that looks like. And then you're going to come home with me. And so my father stayed for the Tish. He joked that he was holding a Shiloh sitter at the time. And
which
that
is a
he had
reform
pieces
sitter.
of potato kugel. Yes. He had pieces of potato kugel stuck in his sitter for years and years and years. He would check it for Pesach from that Tish, from that Rebbe.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And he went home with this chassid. Now, this chassid turned out to be Rabbi Shlomo Pappenheim. For everybody who doesn't know, Rabbi Shlomo Pappenheim was one of the founders of the girls' orphanage called Bayit Lepletot in Jerusalem.
Okay. So very important person in Jerusalem. He did a lot of good, a lot of chesed. Okay.
Yes.
That matches, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. But what's amazing was, how did he speak this amazing English that he was able to even go to my father and speak to him? He was one of the children that were on the kinder transport from Germany to England, where he learned perfect English and was able to communicate that way, which is an amazing, amazing fact.
Yeah. So he was like the kinder transport brought Jewish children from Europe to get them out so that they wouldn't perish from the Holocaust, and then kind of fostered them into regular British homes, many of them not Jewish. And then after the war was over, a lot of them came to Israel, right?
Yes. And he was a Toldos Aaron chassid. So everything God does, obviously, is for a reason. But when you see a chain, when you can see the flow, right? That if my father, if he had been there and nobody could have approached him, or if they tried and spoke English or Yiddish, which he wasn't fluent in, who knows what would have happened? Who knows where he would be today? The fact that this, first of all, that he came over, right, to somebody who so clearly did not fit in at all and offered him to come to his house. Now, I grew up when we grew up with, so Rabbi Pappenheim was really credited as being my father's mashpia or influencer. So we had a very wonderful relationship with him growing up. And in fact, when I myself went to Israel for my gap year, and I was sort of on my own sort of journey of figuring out where I belonged as a person whose parents became religious, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to be.
Right.
Rabbi Pappenheim invited me into his home. He lived at 5 Chazanovich, I'll never forget it, street in Strauss area.
Yeah.
And simple home, but an amazing home. He taught me so much. He invited me into his home. And I'll never forget, because he would give a very lengthy kiddush, right? The blessing on the grape juice for Shabbos. It would take a while. It could take 20 minutes, half hour. But
Wow.
when somebody came, a guest came, when I came, he said, I want to make a quick one for you because I want to make sure that you get to eat right away. The way he treated and the fact that we're talking about, by the time I went, he was elderly already, and that he could relate to a teenager, an 18-year-old girl,
Right.
an American, in his home was amazing. It blew me away. He actually passed away a couple of years ago, and I was blessed to be able to go back to see his grave.
I think that it's a really important point that you make, and I like to emphasize this, and you hear it throughout many of the interviews that I've done, is that it's that moment of warmth and acceptance of people who are different that makes the difference. And I think that not only is that a lesson for religious Jews who tend to be afraid of that which is different from ourselves, and we tend to be afraid of, if I bring this person into my home, how are they going to influence my children, or how are they going to behave? Are they going to ruin my Shabbat, or whatever it is that goes through people's minds? But I think it's also a lesson for the greater world, that if we can learn how to treat people who are different with the same level of love and warmth and respect as we would those who are the same as us, I think that the entire world would be healed.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. In fact, as I was researching before talking to you about Rabbi Pappenheim, just to remind myself, I found an article about him that somebody had done before he passed away, where he was also very involved in the Eda Haredis. So they did an article where there was some sort of demonstration in Israel, in Mea Shearim, on Shabbos. Sometimes the whether it was some sort of
a protest of,
I would say it was like a physical one with the army. And he very much said, I don't believe that that's the way towards Judaism. That's the way that we're going to spread Judaism, is through this physical way. It's going to make it look to the world ugly. We want it to be a beautiful thing.
Right.
And I think that that's what he personified, was that let's spread the word. And I can tell you he spent hundreds of hours with my father.
Wow.
And over the subsequent years, when we would come back, when my father came back he came back with my mother, his wife, and then he brought us all back. And every time we would go, that was an integral part of our trip. I'll never forget climbing up. There was these little thin stairs, circular stairs to get upstairs. And his grandchildren would come. He had many children and grandchildren, and we felt like we were like his American grandchildren. They would come in their Hasidic garb, and we would come all American and still felt so warm and accepted. And I agree 100% that that's the way. That's the way that we're going to spread Judaism.
Amazing.
So that's
okay.
There's no question to me. Yeah.
Wow, fantastic. And unfortunately, we're out of time for this second segment. So we're going to have to hear the rest of the story when we come back. And when we come back, we'll continue our fascinating conversation with my very special guest, Shani Kramer. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on The Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the last segment of today's Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I'm speaking with Shani Kramer, Program Director for the Jewish Federation in South Bend, Indiana. Shani has been sharing with us what it was like growing up in a home with two Balei Teshuvah parents, and before the break, she shared with us about her father's journey to Torah and a fascinating encounter with a very special rabbi in Israel. And now, Shani, you're going to tell us a little bit about your mom's story, right?
That's right. So my mom was born very shortly after the war. My mom was born in Europe, actually, at the time. And she was born to a Romanian mother. And they sort of moved around a little bit right after the war and ended up, interestingly enough, in Israel for a couple of years, probably from the time she was maybe 2-3 years old till she was about 8. So my mom lived in Israel with her mother and her stepfather. And from there, they were told that they had some reparations from the war available for them back in Germany if they moved back. So they actually moved back to Germany, and her stepdad set up some sort of business, which didn't work out too well. And at some point, they decided that they needed to come over to America. And at that time, it wasn't so simple to come over. You have to come on like a quota. You had to have come from a certain place, and they would send you to whatever city they would choose.
Right.
That was their choice. And at the time, they couldn't get on my stepfather's, I guess he was from Germany, his quota, but they could get on my grandmother's Romanian one. And so, believe it or not, they were sent over to a little small Midwestern town called Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where they were sent. And my mom grew up not religious at all, and really didn't have too much exposure to it. By the time she got to Cincinnati, she was already a teenager. And at that time already, of course, I had mentioned that my dad was at University of Cincinnati and went to Israel for his break year. And now when he came back, he was already on his path towards religious Judaism.
Right.
In fact, I think he gave my grandmother quite a scare when he stepped off the boat with a big black yarmulke on his head.
Oh my gosh. Who are you and what have you done with my son, right?
Yes, that's right. And you know what? My grandmother, she was amazing. My grandmother, she was the only one I grew up with. She was not religious throughout her life, but she was extremely accommodating and just so wonderful towards her son and all the changes that he brought into her life.
Right.
So I think that was an amazing point to make. So my father ended up back at University of Cincinnati when he came back from Israel to finish his degree. And my mother was in Cincinnati as well. And what basically happened was my father was attending some sort of Zionistic Israeli classes. And at one point he was looking for a ride home. And somebody mentioned to him, oh, well, there's this girl that's over here who she might be able to give you a ride home. And it turned out it was my mom. And so the two of them met, and my father, I would really say, was really my mother's influencer. He was the one who then introduced her. So there was a big Chabad in Cincinnati that my father remained connected to. And so the two of them together, they were introduced to each other and started dating, really started together become more religious through the assistance of the Chabad that was there. And they married actually in 1968. And, I would say, as they say, the rest is history. They've continued to grow in their Judaism, but really their main, when they became religious was before they got married, and then they grew together, which I think is such a beautiful thing in a marriage to grow together in Judaism.
Absolutely.
That's their story.
Okay, so by the time that you came around, they weren't really newbies. Like I know with us, my kids were 6 to 12 in age range when I came back to Judaism and my husband converted. And so that meant that they were old enough that every holiday we pulled out the books to study about what was going on. And, even to this day, we still feel like we sometimes have to ask our kids questions, do we do this on this holiday? Do we say this? Is this the way we do this? But did you see a lot of that going on, or did your parents really know where they were at by the time you came around?
It's very interesting because I feel, and this is my experience with Balei Tshuva, at least the one I had growing up, I feel like for a Baal Tshuva, they're constantly looking for their place, right? So they've chosen a different path. It's different from their family. They don't have the same traditions that somebody might have who was born into a religious home. So they're searching. So I did feel like my parents were always searching, and we were trying to find our place within the religious community. Where do we fit? And I see that that's very common. I'm married to, my husband is also a son of two parents who both became religious. And I saw that as well, that they tried a couple of different, maybe sects in religious Judaism to figure out where they might fit. So I did feel that a little bit growing up, that we didn't maybe we weren't traditional in that sense. I didn't have a Bubby and Zadie in that way. I had my Nana, my grandmother, who was amazing, but it was quite different. We would go to Florida and my grandmother would, we would have to kosher her kitchen. We did different things. I would say, oh, I'm going to my grandmother's house and, now I can, watch a little bit of Superman. It was definitely different from what my peers were doing at the time. I don't think it was, a negative way, but I did feel like I didn't grow up with cousins who were going through the same path as I was, which was hard as a kid, seeing kids doing different things. That was difficult. And I think there were definitely times where, especially as a teenager, when I started to sort of express my own doubts of where I belonged in Judaism, where my parents maybe had a bigger fear of where is my child going to go, or why, and confusion is really what it was. Why would my child choose something that I have chosen not to be? Why would they even want to go back there?
Right.
And I would feel like, oh, my parents totally can't relate, totally can't relate to me. Why don't they see? I don't understand Judaism all the time. Just because someone told me to do something, why should I do it? Whereas my parents would look at me and be like, it was so sad for them. Like, they chose this life. Why would somebody not want to continue?
Right. I see the beauty and the truth in it. Why can't you see the beauty and the truth in it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it just took my own time out in the world to figure out, okay, this is what I want. Like, being a religious Jew it's almost like they said, I almost have to make my own Baal Tshuva moment choice. Like, this is, right. I'm not only doing it because I was born into it, but this is because what I want to do, what I believe is the right thing to do. So we've had something that I look back that might be considered humorous now, but wasn't so humorous at the time. But I remember as a older teenager, I told my father that I wanted to join the YMCA as a gym. I wanted to go work out at the YMCA. So I come home and I'm all excited to have the brochure, right? And I say, Abba, I'm gonna join the YMCA. And to my father, the YMCA, way back when it first started, it was really like a Christian association. It was meant for people
that's what it
were,
stands for, Young Men's Christian Association. Yeah,
that's right. I had no clue, by the way, as a teenager. YMCA stood for, okay, I'm going to the gym.
Right.
So that was definitely a misunderstanding. And my father looked at me, he's like, thought I was completely going off the path, like to the other end. Like, what's happening? And I said, no, Abba, just till we figured it out,
Yeah.
It's one of the travails of being a teenager. But that was definitely a moment where there was just a disconnect, where we didn't really understand we were on the same page. But I think there were many moments for me growing up where I definitely realized, okay, my parents are different, until I grew up to realize that different is good. We're all different. That's the truth. It's okay. Like, this was my parents' journey. This is an amazing journey. And I've had access to so many resources like Rabbi Pappenheim. And then for my father, for 30 years, has been going, he still has up to this year, so it's even more than 30 years, has been going to Camp Aguda up in the country and is known as Crafty. He's beloved by thousands of people know my father. He's quite a personality. And we've been blessed to know Rabbi Yisrael Belsky, who is one of the Gadol Hador, and really all these amazing associations, all these people who took my father, who was always growing and who's really, I would say, a self-made man. He picked himself up. He decided this is what he's doing. He never learned officially in a religious institution ever. Right. And yet, if you would see him today, he's a proud grandfather, great-grandfather with a long white beard. I think it would be hard for you to even guess that he had his start somewhere else. only if he opens his mouth. When he talks, you can hear that he has, my father's, like I said, he was an English professor, right? So he has this way of talking, which is unusual for maybe your typical religious Jew. And I think that that's really an amazing thing. That's a really something that he can use to draw people in, to show that you could come from this background, right, and turn into a religious Jew. And hopefully we could still all relate to each other. We could still all have that kindness and draw everybody in. I mean, that's what I'm doing as a program director. That's what I feel passionate about. My primary goal is I almost feel like I'm a bridge, right? I'm the bridge between what my parents were to what my children are now. And so that's what I find my goal is in life, is to bridge between all types of Jews with my wonderful past that my parents have provided for me. And just with that exposure, it really allows me to become that bridge, that person in the middle who can sort of figure out both ways of life and hopefully spread a lot of kindness that way.
Amazing, amazing. Well, unfortunately, Shani, we are out of time for today's program. If something that you said touched somebody and they would like to be in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
They are welcome to send me an email. My email address is just my name. It's kramershani@gmail.com.
Okay, so it's KramerShani@gmail.com.
That's correct.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. It was wonderful being with you.
Okay, well, you've been listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'd love to hear from you as well. If you'd like to be in touch with me, you can email me at penina@israelnewstalkradio.com. That's PENINA@israelnewstalkradio.com. Thanks again for being here with me today, and I'll see you next time when we take a leap of faith together here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.